The moment I saw a trash can where my seat should have been, I realized my son had already chosen his new family over me. I wish I could tell you I overreacted that day. I wish I could say I stood up in the middle of that ballroom and caused a scene like everyone later claimed I should have. But the truth is, when humiliation arrives quietly, it steals your voice before it steals your dignity. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and 3 Saturdays ago, I drove 4 hours to attend my only son's wedding believing it would be one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, it became the day I finally understood how easy it is for people to throw away a mother once they no longer need her. The wedding venue sat outside Asheville, North Carolina, on one of those sprawling vineyard estates people post all over Facebook pretending their lives are perfect. White roses lined the walkway. Crystal chandeliers glowed through giant ballroom windows. Every parking attendant smiled with rehearsed politeness as expensive SUVs pulled up one after another. I remember sitting in my old silver Buick for a moment before getting out, smoothing my navy blue dress across my knees and checking my lipstick in the mirror. I had saved for months to buy that dress. Not because anyone asked me to look nice, but because when your son gets married, you want to feel like you still matter in the story somehow. Ethan used to tell me I was the strongest woman he knew. Back when he was little, he'd cling to my arm every time thunderstorms hit our trailer in Ohio. I raised him alone after his father left when Ethan was 9. There were years I worked double shifts at the diner and still came home counting quarters to keep the lights on. I skipped meals so he could play Little League. I sold my wedding ring so he could afford textbooks during freshman year at Penn State. None of that felt like sacrifice back then. That's what mothers do. We convince ourselves love is an investment that eventually comes back around. I walked into the ballroom carrying a cream-colored gift envelope in my purse and immediately noticed how cold the room felt toward me. Not temperature-wise. Emotionally. Conversations softened when I approached. Vanessa's bridesmaids glanced at me, then quickly looked away while whispering behind champagne glasses. Vanessa herself barely hugged me when she came over. "You made it," she said with a tight smile before checking her phone mid-conversation. Ethan looked distracted too. Nervous. He kissed my cheek quickly but wouldn't hold eye contact longer than a second. "Everything okay?" I asked him quietly. "Yeah, Mom," he answered too fast. "Just stressed." I told myself weddings made everyone emotional. I ignored the knot forming in my stomach. Cocktail hour started outside near the vineyard while guests took photos under string lights. A jazz trio played Frank Sinatra covers while servers passed trays of crab cakes and tiny glasses of champagne. Everywhere I looked, people seemed connected to someone except me. I recognized maybe 4 relatives from Ethan's side. The rest belonged to Vanessa's world. Wealthy parents. Country club friends. Perfect teeth. Perfect hair. People who looked at me like I'd accidentally wandered into the wrong event. Still, I kept smiling. Mothers do that too. We smile to make other people comfortable even while our own hearts quietly crack open. About 30 minutes before dinner, guests began moving toward the reception seating area. Large gold-framed signs displayed table assignments in elegant white lettering. I walked over slowly, excited despite everything. Maybe Ethan planned a special speech. Maybe there'd be a mother-son dance like we practiced years ago joking around in my kitchen. I scanned the seating chart until I found my name. Margaret Whitmore. Table 7. Right beside the dance floor. For one brief moment, relief washed over me. "See?" I thought. "You were imagining things." Then I walked to table 7. And stopped breathing. At first, my brain genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. The table had 8 elegant white chairs wrapped in satin ribbons. Crystal glasses sparkled under candlelight. Gold chargers sat perfectly aligned beside folded linen napkins. But at the end of the table, where my place card rested, there wasn't a chair. There was a silver trash can. A real one. Tall. Round. Polished stainless steel with a ridiculous white bow tied around the lid. Someone had taped my seating card directly onto the front of it. Margaret Whitmore. I heard laughter before I even realized people were watching me. Small laughs at first. Then louder ones from the younger guests nearby. One bridesmaid covered her mouth while giggling. Another person lifted a phone slightly, recording. I stood there frozen, clutching my purse strap so tightly my fingers hurt. Vanessa appeared beside me holding a champagne flute like she was arriving for a comedy routine. Oh my God, she laughed loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear. Margaret, relax. It's just a joke. More laughter. My face burned instantly, but my body felt cold everywhere else. I looked at Ethan. That's the part one remember most clearly. Not the trash can. Not the guests. My son. Standing 10 feet away beside the bar pretending to examine whiskey bottles so he wouldn't have to look at me. Ethan? I said softly. He rubbed the back of his neck without meeting my eyes. Mom, don't take it personally, he muttered. Vanessa thought it'd be funny. Funny. I stared at that ridiculous trash can while people waited to see what I would do next. Someone near the dance floor whispered, "Is she gonna cry?" Another voice laughed. A little girl around 8 years old tugged on her mother's sleeve and innocently asked, "Why does Grandma have to sit in the garbage can?" Her mother quickly shushed her, but the damage was done. In that moment, something inside me shifted permanently. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a lock clicking shut. People love to say humiliation only hurts for a moment. That is a lie. Real humiliation keeps replaying itself long after the room goes quiet. I stood beside that table staring at the silver trash can while laughter echoed around me like I was trapped underwater. Every second stretched painfully slow. I could hear glasses clinking somewhere near the bar. A woman behind me whispered something that ended with the words "poor thing." Someone else laughed again. My cheeks burned so badly I thought I might faint. But somehow my body stayed perfectly still. Maybe because after raising a child alone for most of your life, you learn how to survive embarrassment without collapsing. You learn how to swallow pain quietly because there is usually nobody coming to rescue you. Vanessa took another sip of champagne and smiled at the guests surrounding us. "Come on, everybody," she said dramatically. It was only supposed to be a harmless little wedding prank. Her bridesmaids laughed on cue like trained performers. One of them actually snapped a picture of the trash can while covering her mouth pretending not to laugh too loudly. I looked at Ethan again, desperately hoping he would finally step forward and stop this. Even then, after everything, I still believed my son would remember who I was to him. But Ethan stayed frozen near the bar with one hand in his pocket, staring down at the floor like avoiding eye contact somehow made him innocent. That hurt more than anything Vanessa could have done. Because cruelty from strangers feels different than betrayal from your own child. A stranger does not know your sacrifices. A stranger never watched you count grocery money at midnight while pretending everything would be okay. A stranger never heard you crying quietly in the bathroom after another overdue electric bill arrived. But your child knows. Your child remembers. Or at least they are supposed to. Margaret? Vanessa tilted her head with fake concern. You are making people uncomfortable. That sentence snapped something awake inside me. Not rage. Not revenge. Clarity. I suddenly realized they had planned this carefully. This was not spontaneous. Somebody had ordered that trash can. Somebody had tied that white satin bow around it. Somebody printed my name card and taped it there while laughing about how funny my reaction would be. And the worst part was realizing Ethan knew ahead of time. He had to know. Weddings do not accidentally include decorated garbage cans at formal reception tables. I slowly loosened my grip on my purse strap and forced myself to breathe evenly. If I cried, they would enjoy it. If I screamed, I would become the crazy dramatic mother-in-law Vanessa already painted me to be. I could practically hear future conversations forming in their heads. She ruined the wedding. She caused a scene. She could not take a joke. People always protect the person who laughs first. The victim becomes the problem because discomfort makes bystanders nervous. So instead of crying, I smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a forgiving smile. Just enough to confuse them. Vanessa blinked slightly when she saw it. Well, I said softly, I certainly would not want to ruin your big day. The surrounding guests quieted a little, probably disappointed they were not getting the emotional explosion they expected. I reached down calmly and adjusted my place card on the front of the trash can as if it were completely normal. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my face composed. You know, I added gently, I spent 40 years teaching children in Sunday school. I have learned that people usually reveal who they truly are during celebrations, not during hard times. Vanessa's smile tightened instantly. Ethan finally looked up at me then, nervousness flickering across his face. He knew that tone. It was the same calm voice I used when he was 16 and trying to lie about wrecking the neighbor's mailbox. It was the voice that meant I already understood more than they realized. But I did not say another word. I simply picked up my purse and walked toward the ladies' room while everyone watched silently. The second the restroom door closed behind me, my knees almost gave out. I grabbed the marble countertop and stared at my reflection in the mirror under soft golden lighting. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her lipstick had faded slightly. Her eyes looked older than they had that morning. I turned on the sink faucet mostly to drown out the noise building inside my chest. For a moment, I considered leaving immediately. Just getting in my car and driving home to Ohio without saying goodbye to anyone. But then I remembered something my mother once told me after my father abandoned us. Never leave quietly when someone is trying to erase your dignity. Leave on your own terms. I stood there breathing slowly until my heartbeat steadied again. Then I opened my purse and looked at the cream-colored envelope resting inside. I had brought it intending to surprise Ethan privately after dinner. Inside was something far more valuable than cash. Documents. Legal papers. Things Ethan clearly had forgotten existed. I stared at that envelope for a long moment before sliding it back into my purse carefully. Outside the restroom, muffled music resumed. The wedding coordinator announced dinner seating through a microphone while guests laughed and moved around the ballroom. Life continued so easily for everyone else while my entire understanding of motherhood quietly shattered. I touched the small gold cross necklace around my neck, the one Ethan bought me with his first real paycheck when he was 23. Back then he had cried while giving it to me because he said he could never repay everything I had done for him. Funny how quickly gratitude disappears once people start building newer, shinier lives. When I walked back into the ballroom, dinner service had already started. Nobody mentioned the trash can anymore. That somehow made everything feel worse. The humiliation had already become normalized. People avoided looking directly at me now, pretending politeness erased what happened 10 minutes earlier. Vanessa sat laughing with her bridesmaids while Ethan stared into his whiskey glass looking exhausted. I noticed something then that I had missed before. Vanessa's father kept glancing toward me with visible discomfort. Even her mother looked embarrassed. Good. At least someone in that room still understood basic decency. I walked slowly toward table 7 again. Conversations softened as guests watched me approach. But instead of sitting down, I carefully removed the cream-colored envelope from my purse and placed it directly on Ethan's dinner plate. His eyes widened instantly. "Mom," he whispered nervously. I leaned closer just enough so only he could hear me. "Do not open that until after I leave." His face drained of color. Because deep down, my son already knew exactly what was inside. There is something terrifying about watching regret appear on someone's face before they even know the full truth. The second I placed the envelope on Ethan's dinner plate, I saw fear flicker across his eyes like a storm cloud passing over sunlight. Not confusion. Fear. Because somewhere deep inside, my son already understood that some lines cannot be uncrossed once a mother finally stops protecting you from consequences. I straightened slowly and adjusted the sleeve of my navy blue dress while guests around the table pretended not to stare. The ballroom lights reflected softly against crystal glasses and gold decorations while a string quartet played near the dance floor. Everything still looked beautiful on the outside. That is the strange thing about betrayal. It usually happens in beautiful places. Mom, wait, Ethan whispered quickly as I turned away. His voice sounded smaller now, stripped of the confidence he carried earlier beside Vanessa and her friends. But I kept walking. Not because I hated him. A mother never fully stops loving her child. Even in moments when your heart is breaking, some foolish part of you still wants to protect them. No, I walked away because I finally understood something painful. If I stayed near that table any longer, they would slowly convince me I deserved what happened. Toxic people are experts at rewriting reality until the victim starts apologizing for their own humiliation. I moved through the ballroom calmly, ignoring the eyes following me. Near the entrance, an older man in a gray tuxedo stepped awkwardly into my path. It took me a second to recognize him as Vanessa's father, Richard. He looked deeply uncomfortable, like someone forced to witness a car accident they could not stop. Margaret, he said quietly, I just want you to know. I did not know they planned that little stunt. I studied his face carefully. Unlike the others, he actually seemed ashamed. Thank you, I replied politely. That makes one person tonight. His shoulders dropped slightly. Vanessa can be impulsive sometimes, he muttered. I almost laughed at that. Impulsive. As if cruelty magically becomes harmless when wealthy people give it softer vocabulary. I nodded once and continued walking toward the coat check near the lobby. Behind me, I could already hear the reception trying to recover its cheerful atmosphere. Glasses clinked again. Music resumed. Forced laughter floated through the ballroom like everybody desperately wanted to pretend nothing ugly had happened. But tension changes the air in a room. Once dignity has been shattered publicly, everyone feels it whether they admit it or not. I reached the lobby and slipped on my light wool coat slowly, buying myself time to think clearly. Outside the large front windows, the North Carolina mountains had turned dark blue beneath the evening sky. Rain clouds gathered in the distance, pressing against the horizon. For a brief moment, I considered leaving immediately. Driving the 4 hours back home tonight. Forgetting this entire nightmare ever happened. But then I remembered every single time I had rescued Ethan from consequences throughout his life. When he wrecked my car at 17 and I lied to the insurance company to protect him. When he dropped out of graduate school for 6 months without telling anyone because he was depressed and ashamed. When he called me crying at 29 because he could not afford the down payment on the townhouse Vanessa wanted so badly. I was the one who quietly transferred $80,000 from my retirement savings to help them buy that house. Not a loan. A gift. Or at least that is what Ethan believed. My fingers tightened around my purse strap as that memory surfaced. Because the truth was far more complicated than Ethan understood. A young valet near the entrance offered me a sympathetic smile while opening the front door. You heading out, ma'am? He asked softly. I realized then that even complete strangers had noticed the humiliation inside. Soon, I answered. I just need a little air first. The evening breeze hit my face gently as I stepped onto the stone terrace overlooking the vineyard. String lights glowed across the patio while distant laughter drifted from inside the ballroom. From out there, the wedding almost looked magical again. I walked slowly toward the railing and stared at the dark rows of grapevines stretching across the hills. Weddings always promise forever like it is guaranteed. But I have lived long enough to know forever changes people. Sometimes love does not reveal character. Comfort does. Success does. The moment people stop needing you financially or emotionally, you discover whether they truly valued you or merely valued your usefulness. Footsteps approached behind me after a few minutes. I did not even need to turn around to know it was Ethan. A mother recognizes her child's presence instinctively no matter how old they become. "Mom," he said carefully. "Please do not leave angry." I kept my eyes on the mountains. "Angry?" I repeated softly. "No, Ethan. Anger passes quickly. What I feel tonight is much heavier than anger." Silence stretched between us while distant thunder rolled somewhere far away. "Vanessa thought it would lighten the mood," he said weakly. "People online do prank weddings all the time now." I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Not an apology. An explanation. People always expose themselves through the excuses they choose first. "Did you laugh when they planned it?" I asked quietly. Ethan hesitated too long. That hesitation answered everything. I finally turned toward him fully. My son looked exhausted beneath the soft patio lights. His tuxedo was slightly wrinkled already, and panic flickered beneath his expression even though he was trying to hide it. For one heartbreaking second, I still saw the little boy who used to run into my arms after nightmares. Then I remembered the trash can. "Do you know what the saddest part is?" I asked him gently. "It is not that your wife humiliated me. It is that you watched it happen and worried more about upsetting her than protecting your mother." Ethan swallowed hard. "That is not fair." "No," I said calmly. "What happened inside was not fair." He rubbed both hands over his face in frustration. "Mom, can we please just talk about this tomorrow?" There it was again. Delay. Avoidance. Cowardice disguised as peacekeeping. Ethan had spent years convincing himself neutrality made him a good person when really it only made him weak. "Open the envelope after I leave," I reminded him quietly. His expression darkened immediately. "What is in there?" I looked directly into his eyes then. "The part of your life you forgot belonged to me." Before he could respond, the ballroom doors suddenly opened behind us and Vanessa stepped onto the terrace holding her champagne glass. Even from 20 feet away, I could see irritation written across her face. Not guilt. Irritation. Like I had somehow become an inconvenience at her perfect wedding. "Ethan," she called sharply, "they are about to start speeches." Then she looked at me with that same practiced smile she had worn all evening. "Margaret, I really hope you are not still upset. Everybody already moved on." I stared at her for several long seconds. Then I smiled politely. "Oh, sweetheart," I said softly, "trust me. The evening is only getting started. The most dangerous people are not the ones who insult you openly. It is the ones who smile while believing they have already won." Vanessa stood beneath the terrace lights with her champagne glass resting delicately against her manicured fingers, looking at me with the confidence of someone who thought she controlled the entire evening. Behind her, the ballroom doors remained open just enough for warm golden light and soft music to spill onto the patio. Guests inside were beginning to settle into their seats for speeches and dinner, unaware that the foundation beneath the bride and groom's perfect new life was already starting to crack. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside us, his face pale under the dim lights. I could practically hear his thoughts racing now. He kept glancing toward the envelope still sitting on his dinner plate through the ballroom windows as if merely seeing it made him nervous. Good. Fear has a way of waking people up faster than guilt ever will. Vanessa crossed her arms lightly. "Honestly, Margaret, I think everybody would enjoy tonight a lot more if we just moved past this." Her tone carried that polished sweetness some people use when they are actually being cruel. The kind of voice that sounds pleasant enough to confuse witnesses later. I smiled softly at her. You seem very eager to move on. Because it was harmless, she replied quickly. People prank each other at weddings all the time now. It is social media humor. Social media humor. I almost laughed again. Strange how cruelty suddenly becomes acceptable once people can hide behind trends and hashtags. Tell me something, Vanessa, I said calmly. If someone treated your mother that way in public, would you still call it harmless? Her expression flickered for half a second before hardening again. My mother would have laughed. No, I replied quietly. Your mother would have been hurt too. The difference is whether people around her cared enough to notice. Ethan exhaled heavily beside us. Can we please not do this right now, he muttered. There it was again. Not defense. Not accountability. Just desperation to avoid discomfort. For years I had mistaken Ethan's passiveness for kindness. But standing there on that terrace, I finally saw the truth. Cowardice often hides behind politeness because cowardice sounds better when wrapped in calm words. Vanessa stepped closer to Ethan and looped her arm through his possessively. Your mom always takes things too personally, she said lightly while looking directly at me. That is why I told him this might happen. That sentence landed harder than she realized. Not because it hurt my feelings anymore. But because it confirmed something much uglier. They had discussed my reaction beforehand. They expected pain. They planned for humiliation. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Vanessa, what? She snapped defensively. I am tired of pretending your mother likes me. I stared at her quietly while distant thunder rolled again across the mountains. Then suddenly, without warning, memories began lining up in my mind like puzzle pieces finally forming a complete picture. The first Thanksgiving after Ethan introduced us. Vanessa making fun of my Ohio accent after too many glasses of wine. The Christmas dinner where she laughed because I still used coupons at grocery stores. The afternoon she redecorated Ethan's townhouse and threw away the hand-sewn quilt my mother made before she died because it looked too outdated. Every single moment I had dismissed to keep peace suddenly looked different now. I had spent years shrinking myself to make their relationship easier. I convinced myself being tolerated was enough because at least I was still included. But tolerated people are only one inconvenience away from being discarded completely. Ethan rubbed his forehead anxiously. Mom, I said I was sorry. I looked at him carefully. No, Ethan. You actually did not. Silence fell instantly between us. Even Vanessa looked caught off guard by that. Because it was true. Since the moment I found that trash can, my son had explained, avoided, minimized, and defended. But he had never truly apologized. You know what your problem is? Vanessa said suddenly, her voice sharper now. You always make Ethan feel guilty for growing up and having his own life. I slowly turned toward her again. No, sweetheart. Ethan feels guilty because deep down he knows exactly what he allowed tonight. Her jaw tightened immediately. You are unbelievable. And you are disrespectful, I answered softly. But only one of us still understands shame. Ethan stepped between us slightly. Enough, he whispered harshly. Please. I looked at my son for several long seconds. His tuxedo. His wedding ring. The exhaustion in his eyes. Somewhere beneath all of that was still the little boy who used to wait by the window every Friday night when I came home late from the diner. Back then he would run to the door and hug me before I even set my purse down because he said he missed me too much during my shifts. I remembered one winter when the heat stopped working in our trailer during a snowstorm. Ethan could not have been older than 10. I spent the entire night sitting beside his bed wrapped in blankets pretending it was an adventure so he would not realize how scared I was. Mothers carry those memories forever. Children usually outgrow them. Do you remember the blue inhaler you needed when you were little? I asked suddenly. Ethan looked confused by the question. What? Your asthma medication, I continued calmly. The one insurance would not fully cover after your father left. His face softened slightly with confusion. Yeah. I guess. I worked overnight shifts at the diner for 8 straight months to pay for those prescriptions. I would sleep 3 hours a day, then wake up smiling so you would never know we were struggling. Vanessa shifted impatiently beside him. She clearly did not care about any of this. But Ethan remembered. I could see it happening across his face. Why are you bringing that up now? He asked quietly. Because every sacrifice a mother makes becomes invisible once people decide she is no longer useful, I answered. Tonight proved that. For the first time all evening, Ethan actually looked ashamed. Real shame. Not irritation. Not embarrassment. Shame. Vanessa noticed it too and immediately squeezed his arm tighter. Ethan, the speeches are starting, she said firmly. Everybody is waiting. Waiting. Yes, they were. Waiting for toasts. Waiting for cake. Waiting for dancing and staged happiness beneath expensive lights. None of them realized the entire evening was balancing on one unopened envelope. I glanced through the ballroom windows again. Guests laughed while servers carried plates to tables. The silver trash can still sat at table 7 with my name card attached to the front. Nobody had bothered removing it. That detail made me smile internally. They truly believed the joke was over. They still thought humiliation only belonged to the person being mocked. Vanessa followed my gaze and shrugged casually. Honestly, Margaret, if it upset you that much, we can remove it later. Later. Like dignity could simply be cleaned up after dessert. I looked back at her and smiled with complete calm. No, I said softly. Leave it there. Ethan frowned immediately. Mom, I think it deserves to stay, I continued. Some reminders are important. Before either of them could respond, the wedding coordinator appeared at the terrace doors holding a clipboard nervously. They are ready for the best man speech, she announced carefully while glancing between us. Vanessa instantly switched back into performance mode, smoothing her dress and forcing another perfect bride smile. Coming, she chirped brightly. Then she looked at me one last time. I really hope we can all move forward after tonight. I held her gaze steadily. Oh, we will, I said gently. Just not in the direction you expected. Some people believe karma arrives dramatically like thunder breaking across the sky. But real consequences usually arrive quietly, sitting unopened on a dinner plate while everyone is too distracted by champagne and wedding speeches to notice their entire future shifting beneath them. I remained on the terrace after Vanessa and Ethan disappeared back inside the ballroom. The mountain air felt colder now, and somewhere beyond the vineyards, lightning flickered silently behind dark clouds. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself and listened to the muffled applause erupting through the ballroom walls. The best man speech had probably started. Laughter followed a few seconds later. It amazed me how quickly life moves on after somebody is humiliated. 1 minute you are the center of everyone's attention. The next minute they are sipping wine and laughing at jokes again like your pain was only part of the evening's entertainment package. I should have felt devastated standing out there alone. Instead, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in years, I was no longer trying to earn a place in my son's life. That realization hurt deeply, but it also brought relief. There is peace in finally understanding where you stand with people. Even when the truth is ugly. A server stepped onto the terrace carrying an empty tray and paused awkwardly when she noticed me. She looked maybe 22, with tired eyes and sensible shoes that reminded me of the kind I used to wear during double shifts at the diner. Ma'am, she said softly, are you okay? Such a simple question. Yet none of my own family had asked it all evening. I smiled gently at her. I will be. She hesitated before lowering her voice. For what it is worth, I thought what they did was really mean. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Not because of the insult itself anymore, but because kindness from strangers suddenly felt more genuine than love from my own child. "Thank you," I whispered. The young woman nodded once and headed back inside, leaving me alone again with the sound of distant music and approaching rain. I looked down at my hands resting against the stone railing. These hands had spent decades building a life for Ethan. I remembered sewing Halloween costumes late at night because store-bought ones cost too much. I remembered clipping coupons at the kitchen table while he did homework beside me. I remembered driving through snowstorms to attend every basketball game, every school concert, every parent-teacher conference. Mothers build entire worlds out of exhaustion and sacrifice, then act surprised when nobody notices the construction work afterward. My phone buzzed softly inside my purse, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a text message from my neighbor back in Ohio, Linda. "Hope the wedding is beautiful. Send pictures." I stared at the message for several seconds before locking my phone again without replying. How could I possibly explain what tonight had become? Nobody wants to admit their own child allowed them to be publicly humiliated. It feels like confessing failure as a parent somehow. That is another cruel trick about motherhood. Society teaches women to take personal responsibility for the character of their children long after those children become adults capable of making their own decisions. The ballroom doors opened again behind me. This time it was Richard, Vanessa's father. He walked slowly onto the terrace carrying 2 glasses of bourbon. Without asking, he handed one to me. "Looks like you could use this," he said quietly. I accepted the glass politely even though I rarely drank anything stronger than sweet tea. Richard leaned against the railing beside me and sighed heavily. "I need you to know something," he said after a long silence. "Vanessa has always had a cruel streak when she feels threatened." I glanced at him carefully. "Threatened by me?" "By anybody Ethan loves besides her." He rubbed tiredly at his forehead. "She grew up competing for attention. Her mother spoiled her rotten after our divorce. Vanessa learned early that embarrassment gives her control over people." I took a slow sip of bourbon, feeling the warmth burn gently down my throat. "And what did Ethan learn?" Richard looked uncomfortable immediately. "Honestly," he asked quietly, "I think your son learned that keeping Vanessa happy matters more to him than doing the right thing." Hearing a stranger confirm what I already knew somehow hurt worse than discovering it myself. Richard exhaled heavily. "I almost stopped the prank earlier," he admitted. "But Vanessa begged me not to interfere. She said you two always had tension and this would lighten the mood." I laughed softly under my breath. Amazing how often cruel people describe humiliation as humor. Richard stared out toward the vineyards. "You remind me a little of my own mother," he said after a moment. Strong women from that generation rarely defend themselves properly. They spend too much time protecting everyone else. His words settled heavily between us because they were true. I had spent so many years trying not to burden Ethan emotionally that I accidentally taught him my feelings were negotiable. "You know what the saddest part is?" I asked quietly. I would have forgiven almost anything tonight if Ethan had simply stood up for me in that moment. Richard nodded slowly. Sometimes silence betrays people more deeply than words. Another burst of applause echoed from inside the ballroom. Then laughter. Then music again. I imagined Vanessa glowing beneath chandeliers while guests admired her dress and toasted her future. She probably believed she had already won. Wealthy people often confuse temporary comfort with permanent security. But security built on somebody else's sacrifices becomes fragile once that person finally stops carrying the weight. Richard glanced toward the ballroom windows nervously. "Have they opened the envelope yet?" he asked carefully. I smiled faintly. "Not yet." "Should I be worried for my daughter?" I considered the question honestly. "No," I said after a moment. "Not worried. Just prepared." Before he could ask anything else, movement inside caught my attention. Through the ballroom windows, I saw Ethan standing abruptly from his seat at table 7 holding the cream-colored envelope in his hand. My pulse remained perfectly steady. Apparently curiosity had overpowered my instructions. Vanessa looked annoyed beside him while guests nearby turned to stare. Even from outside, I could tell something had changed in Ethan's face. The color had completely drained from it now. Richard noticed too. "What did you put in there?" he whispered. I watched my son unfold the first set of papers with trembling hands beneath the ballroom chandeliers. "The truth," I answered softly. Inside the envelope were copies of the original trust documents connected to Ethan's townhouse in Charlotte. 3 years ago, when Ethan begged for help buying the property Vanessa desperately wanted, I agreed to provide the $80,000 down payment under one condition suggested by my attorney. My name would remain attached to the property through a family trust until the mortgage reached a certain threshold. Ethan signed every document himself. But somewhere between promotions, expensive vacations, and marrying Vanessa, he apparently forgot. Or maybe he assumed I would never enforce anything connected to it because mothers are expected to keep giving forever without limits. Inside the envelope was also something else. A handwritten letter. Not cruel. Not vindictive. Just honest. I watched through the glass as Ethan unfolded the letter slowly. Vanessa leaned closer, irritation fading into confusion. Around them, conversations were beginning to quiet. Guests noticed the sudden tension spreading across the sweetheart table. Richard looked at me nervously again. "Margaret, do you know what happens?" I interrupted gently, "when people mistake kindness for weakness?" Lightning flashed again across the distant mountains. Then finally, after hours of threatening rain, the storm broke. Rain hammered against the vineyard windows as silence slowly spread across the ballroom table by table like a stain nobody could ignore anymore. From the terrace, I watched Ethan grip the papers with shaking hands while Vanessa leaned over his shoulder trying to understand why his expression suddenly looked terrified. The string quartet had stopped playing. Somewhere near the dance floor, a nervous cough broke the silence before fading again. Even through the glass, I could feel the energy inside changing. People sense disaster before they fully understand it. Richard stood beside me quietly holding his bourbon glass while thunder rolled across the mountains. "What exactly did your letter say?" he asked carefully. I kept my eyes on Ethan. "Only the truth," I answered softly. And truth usually sounds cruel to people who spent years avoiding it. Inside the ballroom, Ethan unfolded the handwritten letter again more slowly this time. Vanessa tried reaching for it, but he pulled it back instinctively. That movement alone told me everything. For the first time all evening, my son was no longer protecting his wife. He was protecting himself. Guests near the sweetheart table began whispering nervously while pretending to focus on dinner. The wedding coordinator stood frozen beside the DJ booth clutching her clipboard like she was waiting for instructions nobody knew how to give. And there, glowing beneath crystal chandeliers and soft candlelight, sat the silver trash can with my name still attached to it like a monument to arrogance. I thought seeing Ethan panic would make me feel victorious. Instead, I mostly felt tired. There is a sadness that comes from realizing the people you loved most only valued your kindness because they assumed it had no limits. Ethan suddenly stood from his chair so quickly his wine glass tipped sideways onto the white tablecloth. Vanessa grabbed his arm immediately. "Ethan, what is going on?" she hissed. He ignored her completely and looked toward the terrace windows searching for me. When our eyes met across the ballroom, I saw something I had not seen in years. Not confidence. Not defensiveness. Fear mixed with shame. He excused himself abruptly and started moving through the crowd toward the terrace doors while guests watched openly now. Vanessa followed close behind him in heels clicking sharply across the ballroom floor. Richard sighed heavily beside me. "This is going to get ugly." "No," I said calmly. Ugly already happened when they publicly humiliated an old woman for entertainment. The terrace doors swung open hard enough for rain-cooled wind to rush inside behind them. Ethan stepped out first, clutching the envelope tightly in one hand. Vanessa followed immediately, her face pale with anger now instead of smug amusement. "What is this?" Ethan demanded, holding up the trust documents. His voice cracked slightly beneath the sound of rain. I remained calm against the stone railing. "Legal paperwork," I answered softly. "You signed it 3 years ago." Vanessa grabbed the papers from his hand aggressively and scanned them quickly. Her expression changed almost instantly. Confusion first. Then disbelief. Then panic. "What do you mean the house belongs to the Whitmore Family Trust?" she snapped. "That is our house." "Partially," I corrected gently. "The trust still controls ownership interest until specific mortgage conditions are fulfilled." Vanessa stared at me like she was suddenly looking at a stranger. "You never told us this." "Actually," I replied calmly, "my attorney explained it very clearly during closing." Ethan signed every page himself. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face like he was trying to wake himself from a nightmare. "Mom, you said the down payment was a gift." "It was," I answered. "The trust protected both of us. Or at least it was supposed to." Vanessa looked horrified now. "So what? You can just take our house away because your feelings got hurt?" That sentence settled heavily into the storm air between us. Hurt feelings. That was what she believed tonight had been about. I studied her carefully, then realized something important. Vanessa genuinely did not understand the difference between embarrassment and betrayal. To her, people existed in categories of usefulness and inconvenience. Dignity was negotiable if the joke entertained the right crowd. "No, sweetheart," I said quietly. "This is not about hurt feelings. This is about discovering that my son and his wife see me as disposable." Ethan stepped forward quickly. "Mom, please. Can we not do this tonight?" "Tonight?" I repeated softly. Interesting choice of words, considering tonight was apparently the perfect time to humiliate me publicly. Rain pounded harder across the terrace roof while distant lightning illuminated the vineyards beyond us. Vanessa folded her arms tightly across her chest. "This is emotional manipulation," she snapped. "You are trying to ruin our wedding because of one stupid joke." I almost smiled at that. Cruel people always minimize the damage they cause once consequences arrive. "One stupid joke," I repeated slowly. "Tell me something, Vanessa. When your bridesmaids laughed while recording me beside a trash can, was that before or after you decided I was family?" Ethan looked physically ill now. "Stop," he whispered. But nobody stopped. Not anymore. Years of swallowed disrespect had finally reached daylight. "I welcomed you into my family," I continued calmly. "I defended you when relatives said you were controlling. I paid for half the furniture in your home because Ethan wanted to impress you. I even stayed silent when you mocked my clothes, my accent, and my age because I thought eventually kindness would matter to you." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You always judged me." "No," I answered gently. "I simply noticed who you were much earlier than Ethan did." That landed harder than she expected. I saw it instantly in her eyes. Richard remained silent nearby, watching his daughter unravel in real time. Ethan looked between us helplessly like a child trapped between two storms. "Mom," he said quietly, "please just tell me what you want." Such a heartbreaking question. Because children always assume mothers continue sacrificing forever if asked politely enough. I looked at my son carefully beneath the rain-dark sky. "I wanted respect," I answered. That was all. Silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. Vanessa looked away first. Somewhere inside the ballroom, guests continued whispering nervously while pretending not to watch the drama unfolding outside the terrace windows. The wedding no longer felt elegant now. It felt fragile. Ethan swallowed hard. The letter says you are removing financial support. Yes. You were helping with the mortgage? Vanessa asked sharply, turning toward him. Ethan looked trapped. Sometimes, he admitted quietly. Her face changed instantly again. Not sadness. Calculation. I recognized that look because I had seen it years earlier when Vanessa first learned about Ethan's salary at his finance job. Some people hear numbers louder than emotions. How much support, she pressed. Ethan hesitated too long. Ethan, she demanded. He finally exhaled shakily. Mom covered the down payment and helped during layoffs last year. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. You told me your bonus covered that. I lied, he admitted quietly. That confession shifted the entire atmosphere again. Suddenly this was no longer just about a wedding prank. Cracks were appearing everywhere now. Secrets. Financial dependency. Hidden resentments. All exposed beneath one stormy evening. Vanessa looked back at me with a completely different expression now. Less arrogance. More fear. Margaret, she said carefully, softening her voice for the first time all night, I think maybe we all misunderstood each other. I almost pitied her then. Almost. Because the moment money entered the conversation, respect suddenly appeared too. Funny how quickly kindness becomes important once consequences threaten comfort. I straightened my coat slowly and stepped away from the railing. No, I said gently. You understood perfectly. That was the problem. Ethan looked desperate now. Mom, please do not leave like this. I paused near the terrace doors and looked back at him one last time. Rain reflected across the windows behind him while thunder rolled softly overhead. You already decided where I belong tonight, Ethan, I said quietly. I simply finally believed you. There comes a moment in every toxic family when the truth finally becomes too heavy to hide beneath decorations and polite smiles. You can feel it happening before anybody says a word. The air changes. Faces change. Suddenly everybody realizes the person they underestimated has stopped playing the role they assigned her. I walked back into the ballroom slowly while rain crashed against the high vineyard windows. Conversations lowered instantly as guests noticed me entering again. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody looked amused. Fear and curiosity had replaced entertainment. Ethan and Vanessa followed several steps behind me, but something fundamental had shifted between them now. Earlier in the evening they moved like a united team. Now there was distance. Tiny, nervous distance. I could see it in the way Vanessa kept glancing at him, trying to read his expression, while Ethan avoided looking at her entirely. Good marriages survive embarrassment together. Weak marriages start cracking the moment money and truth enter the room. The string quartet sat awkwardly near the dance floor waiting for instructions while half-eaten dinners cooled on expensive china plates. Guests pretended to continue eating, but nearly every eye followed us as we moved back toward table 7. And there it still sat. The silver trash can with the white satin bow. My name card still taped proudly across the front. Suddenly it no longer looked funny. It looked cruel. Context changes everything. I stopped beside the table and looked down at it quietly. Ethan stood across from me gripping the envelope tightly while Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. Can we please handle this privately? Ethan asked in a low voice. I looked at him calmly. Was my humiliation private? He flinched slightly. Vanessa stepped in immediately. You are dragging this out intentionally. No, I answered softly. Your prank dragged it out. I simply stopped protecting everyone from the consequences. Richard quietly entered the ballroom behind us but remained near the terrace doors watching silently. Even Vanessa's mother now looked deeply uncomfortable at the head table. It amazed me how quickly people retreat once cruelty becomes socially inconvenient. Earlier they laughed. Now nobody wanted ownership of the joke anymore. Ethan lowered his voice further. Mom, the trust documents. I honestly forgot. That sentence almost broke my heart more than the prank itself. Forgot. He forgot the woman who spent her retirement savings helping him buy his dream house still had legal ties protecting both of them. He forgot because somewhere along the way, my sacrifices became expected instead of remembered. Do you know what hurts most? I asked quietly. Not the trash can. Not the laughter. It is realizing how easy it became for you to stop seeing me as a person. Ethan looked exhausted now. That is not true. Then why did you let it happen? Silence. Long enough to answer the question completely. Vanessa suddenly pulled out a chair aggressively and sat down beside the table. Fine, she snapped. Since we are all being honest now, maybe we should admit this tension existed long before tonight. I looked at her carefully. Go ahead. She laughed bitterly under her breath. You never liked me. From day one. Incorrect, I replied calmly. I worried about you from day one. That is different. Her eyes narrowed immediately. Because I am not some small-town church lady like you? Because you confuse control with love, I answered gently. Several nearby guests shifted awkwardly in their seats pretending not to listen while clearly listening to every word. Ethan rubbed his temples in frustration. Please stop. But nobody stopped. Years of hidden resentment had finally cracked open beneath chandelier light and rain-soaked windows. Vanessa leaned forward sharply. You have judged everything about me since the beginning. My clothes. My career. My family. No, I said calmly. I judged how easily you humiliated people whenever you wanted attention. That landed hard enough to make her pause. Because deep down, she knew it was true. I remembered countless moments now with painful clarity. The waitress Vanessa mocked for mispronouncing wine names during Ethan's birthday dinner. The cousin she excluded from Thanksgiving photos because she thought the girl looked awkward. The time she laughed at an elderly cashier moving too slowly at a grocery store while Ethan stayed silent beside her. Cruelty had always existed in her. Tonight was simply the first time it targeted me publicly. Ethan suddenly pulled the handwritten letter from the envelope again. Mom, his voice cracked slightly this time. Did you really mean what you wrote? I looked at him steadily. Every word. The letter had been simple. No screaming. No insults. Just truth. I told Ethan I loved him enough to finally stop rescuing him from becoming a man without character. I told him financial support without respect creates entitlement, not family. And I told him that beginning Monday morning, my attorney would start reviewing every trust obligation and future payment connected to the townhouse. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. Because if I truly meant so little to them, then they no longer deserved unrestricted access to the sacrifices I spent decades building. Vanessa stood abruptly again. This is unbelievable, she snapped. You are threatening us financially because your feelings got hurt at a wedding. No, I answered softly. I am withdrawing from people who publicly treated me like garbage. Nearby, someone quietly dropped a fork against a plate. The sound echoed sharply in the tense silence. Ethan looked trapped between panic and shame. Mom, please. We can fix this. I studied my son carefully. The sad thing was I believed he meant it. But not because he fully understood my pain yet. He wanted the discomfort to stop. He wanted normalcy restored. That is the difference between regret and accountability. Regret wants peace. Accountability accepts consequences. Can I ask you something honestly? I said quietly. Ethan nodded weakly. If the trust papers did not exist, if I had no financial connection to your house at all, would this conversation still be happening right now? His silence shattered me more deeply than any insult tonight. Because once again, silence answered everything. Vanessa noticed it too. Her face darkened immediately as she turned toward him. "Ethan," she whispered sharply. He looked away from both of us. Somewhere near the bar, guests had completely stopped pretending not to watch anymore. The entire ballroom now existed inside uncomfortable stillness. Even the wedding staff looked frozen. The illusion of a perfect evening had completely collapsed. I slowly reached toward the silver trash can and peeled my name card from the front. The tape came off with a soft ripping sound that somehow felt louder than thunder. I stared down at the folded place card resting in my hand. Margaret Whitmore. Mother. Provider. Emergency contact. Financial safety net. Convenient target. Funny how many roles women carry before finally becoming disposable. I placed the card gently onto the dinner table beside Ethan's untouched meal. "You know," I said softly, "when Ethan was 12, he got suspended for punching a boy who mocked another student in class. His teacher told me she had never seen him defend someone so fiercely." Ethan closed his eyes immediately, remembering. "I was proud of you that day," I continued quietly. "Because I thought I raised a man who protected vulnerable people instead of humiliating them." Tears filled Ethan's eyes instantly. Real tears this time. Not panic. Not frustration. Pain. But some realizations arrived too late to prevent damage. Vanessa looked between us anxiously now, finally understanding the depth of what was happening. This was no longer about a wedding prank. It was about a son realizing he had slowly become someone his mother no longer recognized. I picked up my purse calmly and stepped away from the table. "I think it is time for me to go home," I said gently. Ethan looked terrified suddenly. "Mom, please do not leave like this." I paused beside him and touched his shoulder lightly for the first time all evening. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "You already made sure I understood exactly how to leave." The hardest part about walking away from people you love is realizing they expected you to stay no matter how badly they treated you. I could feel every pair of eyes in the ballroom following me as I moved toward the exit with my purse resting quietly against my shoulder. Nobody stopped me this time. Nobody laughed anymore either. The atmosphere had changed completely. Earlier in the evening I was the joke. Now I was the consequence. Rain pounded against the tall vineyard windows while thunder rolled softly through the mountains beyond the estate. Somewhere near the dance floor, the wedding coordinator whispered frantically to the musicians while guests sat frozen beside untouched slices of cake and half-finished wine glasses. The entire reception felt suspended between embarrassment and disaster. Behind me, Ethan's voice cracked through the silence. "Mom, wait." I paused near the ballroom entrance but did not turn around immediately. Some part of me still wanted to hear the right words from him. The apology. The defense. The moment a son finally chooses dignity over comfort. But when I looked back, all I saw was panic. Ethan hurried toward me while Vanessa remained beside the sweetheart table watching nervously. Her confidence from earlier had completely disappeared now. She no longer looked like the glamorous bride controlling the room. She looked scared. Not because she understood my pain. Because for the first time, she realized the people she mocked still held power over her future. Ethan stopped a few feet away, breathing hard. "Please do not leave angry," he whispered again. I studied him quietly. My beautiful boy. My only child. The same little boy who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares and ask if monsters were real. Funny how life answers those childhood questions eventually. "You keep saying that," I replied softly. "But you still do not understand what I am grieving tonight." His eyes filled again immediately. "I made a mistake." "No," I said gently. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. What happened tonight required planning. Ethan looked down at the floor because he knew I was right. That trash can did not appear magically. People discussed it. Laughed about it. Prepared it carefully while imagining my humiliation ahead of time. And through all of that preparation, my son stayed silent. Vanessa thought everybody would laugh, he muttered weakly. Everybody did laugh, I answered calmly. Including you. Silence crushed the space between us again. Nearby guests pretended not to watch while absolutely watching. One older woman at a nearby table actually looked like she might cry for me. Strange how strangers sometimes carry more empathy than family. Ethan rubbed at his eyes in frustration. What do you want me to say? That question finally broke something inside me completely. Because children only ask that when they still think words alone can undo character. I wanted you to stand up for me before the damage happened, I whispered. Not afterward when you became afraid. His face crumpled instantly. For a moment he looked 12 years old again instead of 34. I was trying to keep peace, he admitted quietly. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. The excuse that destroys families more than cruelty itself. People who prioritize peace over principles eventually create environments where disrespect thrives comfortably. No, I said softly. You were trying to avoid conflict with your wife even if it meant sacrificing your mother's dignity. Ethan could not deny it because deep down he knew it was true. Behind him, Vanessa finally approached carefully across the ballroom floor. Her heels clicked softly against polished wood while nervous whispers spread among guests nearby. Margaret, she began cautiously, I think tonight got out of hand. I almost smiled sadly at that sentence. Out of hand. As if cruelty accidentally wandered too far instead of being deliberately unleashed. Interesting, I replied quietly. Because earlier you seemed very proud of your joke. Vanessa swallowed hard. I did not think it would upset you this much. That hurt more deeply than she realized. Not because it was cruel. Because it revealed how little she saw me as a human being at all. You did not think publicly comparing your husband's mother to garbage would upset her? I asked gently. Vanessa looked away immediately. Ethan turned toward her in disbelief now. You told me it would be harmless, he whispered. Because it should have been, she snapped defensively. People tease each other at weddings all the time. Not like that, Ethan replied quietly. That surprised me. It was the first time all evening he openly disagreed with her. Vanessa noticed it too. Her face tightened instantly. Oh, now you are turning this around on me, she asked sharply. You laughed too. There it was. The beginning of blame shifting. Weak relationships always fracture publicly once accountability enters the room. Ethan looked trapped again, but this time something different existed beneath his fear. Awareness. He was finally seeing the ugliness clearly instead of pretending it was harmless fun. I should have stopped it, he admitted softly. Hearing those words should have comforted me. Instead they arrived too late to reach the wound. Some apologies come after trust has already collapsed beneath them. I adjusted my coat slowly while rain rattled harder against the windows. Do you know what I kept thinking about tonight? I asked quietly. Neither of them answered. The winter you got pneumonia when you were 8, I continued, looking at Ethan. I sat beside your hospital bed for 6 nights straight because I was terrified something would happen while you slept. Ethan stared at me silently. I remember nurses bringing me stale coffee at 3 in the morning while snow piled outside the windows. I remember praying to God that if somebody had to suffer, let it be me instead. My throat tightened painfully now, but I kept speaking anyway. That is what motherhood does to women. We spend decades placing our children ahead of ourselves so naturally that eventually they begin believing we exist only for their convenience. Ethan covered his mouth with one trembling hand. Vanessa looked deeply uncomfortable now, probably because emotional truth is difficult to argue against publicly. "Mom," he whispered brokenly. "I loved you more than myself for 34 years, I said softly. "And tonight you let people laugh while I stood beside a trash can with my name taped to it." No thunder. No music. No whispering guests could soften the ugliness of that sentence once spoken aloud. Ethan's shoulders collapsed completely then. Genuine shame finally settled across his face. Not fear about money. Not panic about the house. Shame. Realizing he failed morally in front of the person who loved him most. Vanessa looked around nervously at the surrounding guests who were no longer hiding their discomfort. The social balance had fully shifted now. Earlier people laughed with her. Now they looked embarrassed to even stand nearby. Public opinion changes quickly once cruelty loses its entertainment value. Richard approached slowly from the back of the ballroom and placed a quiet hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Enough," he murmured gently. Vanessa looked furious but remained silent. I took one final glance around the ballroom. The flowers. The chandeliers. The expensive decorations. The untouched wedding cake glowing beneath soft lights. And at table 7, the silver trash can still sitting there like the ugliest centerpiece ever created. Earlier it represented my humiliation. Now it represented theirs. Because people rarely remember who got mocked at events like this. They remember who revealed terrible character publicly. I looked back at Ethan one last time. "I hope someday you understand something," I said quietly. "The people who love you the deepest are usually the ones least likely to humiliate you for attention." Tears rolled openly down his face now. "Please do not go." My chest ached so badly I could barely breathe for a second. Because despite everything, part of me still wanted to stay. Mothers are built that way. We keep reaching toward children even after they wound us. But love without boundaries eventually destroys the person giving it. I leaned forward and kissed Ethan gently on the forehead exactly the way I used to when he was little. "Goodbye, sweetheart," I whispered. Then I turned, walked through the grand ballroom doors, and this time I did not look back. The rain had slowed to a cold drizzle by the time I reached the parking lot, but my hands still trembled as I unlocked my old Buick. Not from fear anymore. From exhaustion. Emotional humiliation drains the body differently than physical pain. It settles deep into your bones like winter cold and stays there long after the moment itself has ended. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door quietly behind me while rainwater rolled down the windshield beneath yellow parking lot lights. For several seconds, I just sat there breathing. Through the large ballroom windows across the vineyard estate, I could still see guests moving around inside like figures trapped inside a snow globe. Elegant dresses. Black tuxedos. Champagne glasses catching chandelier light. Everything still looked beautiful from far away. That is the thing about toxic families. Outsiders usually only see the decorations. They never see the humiliation hidden underneath them. I rested both hands on the steering wheel and stared at my reflection in the dark windshield. My makeup had faded slightly. My eyes looked swollen with exhaustion. I suddenly looked every bit of my 68 years. Earlier that morning, before leaving Ohio, I spent almost an hour curling my hair carefully because I wanted Ethan to feel proud introducing me to people at the wedding. I remembered standing in my tiny bathroom smiling nervously at myself in the mirror while practicing what I might say during the mother-son dance. I had imagined him hugging me and whispering thank you for everything over the years. Funny how motherhood teaches women to survive on tiny hopes. My phone buzzed suddenly against the passenger seat. Ethan. I stared at the screen while the call rang through the silent car. Then stopped. A second later another call came. Then another. I turned the phone face down without answering. Some conversations arrived too late to heal what already broke. Outside, guests hurried beneath umbrellas between the ballroom and valet area while staff loaded gifts into waiting vehicles. Nobody noticed the old woman sitting alone in the silver Buick near the edge of the parking lot. Or maybe they noticed and chose not to approach because shame makes witnesses uncomfortable too. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes briefly. Memories came flooding in without permission. Ethan at 5 years old running barefoot through sprinklers behind our trailer during hot Ohio summers. Ethan at 13 proudly bringing home his first report card with straight A's. Ethan at 22 crying after college graduation because he said he could never repay everything I sacrificed for him. Somewhere along the way, gratitude slowly transformed into entitlement without either of us realizing it. Another call from Ethan lit up the dashboard. Then a text message appeared. Please answer. We need to talk. A second message followed almost immediately. Vanessa is freaking out. I stared at that sentence for a long moment. Not I am sorry. Not are you okay. Vanessa is freaking out. Even now, my son's first instinct was managing emotional chaos instead of understanding emotional damage. I set the phone aside again and started the engine quietly. The heater hummed to life while soft classic country music filled the silence from the radio. For a brief moment, I considered simply driving home and disappearing from their lives completely. Changing my number. Letting attorneys handle the trust paperwork while I quietly rebuilt peace alone. But motherhood is not that simple. Love does not disappear just because respect does. Headlights suddenly flashed across my rearview mirror as another vehicle pulled into the parking spot beside me. Richard stepped out holding an umbrella and approached my driver's side window slowly. I rolled it down slightly. Cool rain-scented air drifted into the car. I thought you might leave without saying goodbye, he said gently. I almost did. He nodded sadly. Vanessa is causing a scene inside now. I looked away toward the ballroom windows. I did not come here to destroy their wedding. I know, he replied quietly. But sometimes people destroy their own celebrations by revealing who they really are. We sat silently for a moment listening to rain tap softly against the roof of the car. Richard finally sighed heavily. Ethan looks devastated. That word twisted painfully inside my chest because despite everything, hearing my son was hurting still affected me instinctively. Mothers never fully stop caring, even when caring becomes painful. Good, I whispered softly before immediately hating myself for saying it. Richard studied me carefully through the partially opened window. You do not mean that. Tears burned suddenly behind my eyes again. No, I admitted quietly. I do not. Because the ugly truth was I still wanted Ethan happy. I still wanted him safe and loved and emotionally whole. That is the tragedy of being a mother. Your heart continues protecting people even after they wound you. Richard adjusted his umbrella against the wind. For what it is worth, he said carefully, I think tonight forced Ethan to see things clearly for the first time. I almost laughed sadly. Sometimes clarity arrives after damage becomes irreversible. Inside the ballroom, movement near the windows caught my attention. Vanessa was pacing angrily near the sweetheart table while several bridesmaids surrounded her anxiously. Ethan stood farther away near the bar staring down at his phone, probably trying to call me again. Even from across the parking lot, I could see how shattered he looked now. She did not know about the mortgage help, did she? Richard asked quietly. I shook my head. No, that explains a lot. Yes. It explained more than he realized. Vanessa married a successful finance executive with a beautiful townhouse in Charlotte and a carefully polished future. Tonight she discovered large pieces of that stability had quietly rested on the sacrifices of the mother she mocked publicly. There is a special kind of humiliation in realizing the person you considered weak actually carried your foundation the entire time. She keeps asking Ethan why he lied about the house, Richard continued softly. And? Apparently he told her his yearly bonuses covered most of the financial help. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he did. Ethan had always hated admitting vulnerability. Even as a child, he pretended things were fine long after they were falling apart. After his father abandoned us, Ethan stopped asking for expensive things almost overnight because he saw how hard I worked. That sensitivity used to make him compassionate. Somewhere adulthood turned it into avoidance instead. My phone buzzed again. This time it was not Ethan. It was a voicemail notification. I stared at it silently before finally pressing play through the car speakers. Ethan's voice filled the quiet interior immediately. "Mom, please call me back. Please. I know I messed up. I know tonight was horrible. But do not do this like lawyers and paperwork and all that. We are family. We can fix this." His voice cracked painfully near the end. "I am sorry, Mom." Real apology finally arrived. Not because I demanded it. Because consequences forced honesty into the open. Tears slipped quietly down my cheeks before I wiped them away quickly. Richard looked away respectfully, pretending not to notice. "Do you think he means it?" I asked softly after the voicemail ended. Richard considered the question carefully. "I think your son spent years trying to avoid difficult truths. Tonight he ran out of places to hide from them." I stared at the glowing ballroom windows again. Guests were leaving now in smaller groups, whispering among themselves beneath umbrellas. Tomorrow morning people would talk about this wedding over coffee and church breakfasts and neighborhood Facebook groups. But they would not remember the flowers or the music. They would remember the mother beside the trash can and the silence that followed afterward. Public humiliation leaves stains even expensive venues cannot clean. Richard stepped back from the window slowly. "Whatever happens next," he said gently, "I hope you know you handled yourself with more grace than most people would have." I looked down at my hands resting against the steering wheel. Hands wrinkled from decades of work and sacrifice. Hands that once packed school lunches at 6 in the morning before double shifts. Hands that signed trust documents because protecting your child financially feels natural when you are a mother. "Grace gets very lonely sometimes," I whispered. Richard nodded sadly because he understood exactly what I meant. He closed the umbrella slightly and stepped away from the car. Before leaving, he paused one final time. "Margaret?" "Yes?" "Do not let tonight convince you that your kindness was weakness." After he walked away toward the ballroom, I sat alone in the quiet parking lot listening to rain and distant thunder while Ethan's voicemail replayed softly in my mind. "We are family." Strange how people only remember those words after they forget how to treat you like one.